There are moments when nothing dramatic happens, yet everything feels different. The room looks the same, the air is still, the sounds are familiar, and yet something inside feels heavier than it was before. Not heavy enough to explain, not sharp enough to name, but present enough to be felt. It arrives quietly without warning and sits beside you like a thought that refuses to leave. You may notice it when the day slows down, when there is nothing demanding your attention, when words fall away and silence stretches a little longer than usual. In that silence, a question often appears, soft and patient. When did things begin to feel this way? Was it something that happened, or something that slowly faded without being noticed? The heart has its own way of remembering. It remembers moments that the mind tries to dismiss. A look that lingered too long, a pause where warmth once lived, a feeling that something is no longer aligned, even if everything appears fine on the surface. And so the weight grows, not from one great burden, but from many small ones left unspoken. In these moments, the world does not feel cruel. It feels distant, as though you are standing slightly apart from everything, watching life move forward while you remain still. You listen more than you speak. You observe more than you act. And in that watching, you begin to sense a quiet tension, like a string pulled too tight but not yet broken. You might wonder if others feel it too, if they notice the same subtle shift, or if this heaviness belongs only to you. Sometimes it feels safer to assume it is yours alone, easier than risking misunderstanding, easier than explaining something that has no clear shape. There is a strange loneliness in this kind of quiet. Not the loneliness of being alone, but the loneliness of feeling unseen while surrounded. You sit with your thoughts, letting them rise and fall, hoping they will settle on their own. Some do, others return again and again, each time carrying the same gentle ache. You may ask yourself why it matters so much, why small moments feel so large when held in silence, why the heart reacts before the mind can reason. There is no immediate answer. Only the steady rhythm of breath and the sense that something within you is asking to be acknowledged. This is not the beginning of collapse. It is not the sound of things ending. It is simply the moment when awareness begins. When you realize that inner peace is not something that disappears suddenly, but something that drifts when unattended. And noticing that drift can feel unsettling, even frightening, because it asks you to sit with yourself without distraction. In this quiet heaviness, there is no demand to fix anything, no call to act, only an invitation to listen, to notice how your chest feels when you think certain thoughts, to observe how silence changes when you allow it to stay. To recognize that discomfort does not always mean danger. Sometimes it means growth is waiting. The night grows calmer when you stop resisting it. The weight does not lift immediately, but it becomes clearer, less threatening. You begin to understand that this feeling is not an enemy. It is a signal, a soft signal, asking for patience, asking for honesty, asking for stillness. And so you remain there quietly present, not rushing forward, not turning away, simply sitting with what is, allowing the moment to unfold at its own pace. In this stillness, the story truly begins. As the quiet settles, the feeling does not leave, it changes shape. What was once a distant heaviness begins to move closer, pressing gently against the chest, asking to be noticed again. Silence no longer feels empty, it feels full of thoughts that were never spoken, emotions that were never given a place to rest. There is a kind of discomfort that has no sharp edge. It does not hurt in a way that demands attention. Instead, it lingers. It follows you into still moments and sits beside you when there is nothing else to hold. You try to distract yourself from it, but it waits patiently, knowing it will be heard eventually. In silence, everything becomes clearer. The mind slows down, but the heart does not. It begins to speak in feelings instead of words. A tightness here, a heaviness there, a sudden warmth, then a quiet ache. And you wonder, when did all of this gather inside? How long has it been? Waiting? Some feelings arrive because they were never welcomed. They were pushed aside in moments when it felt easier to stay calm, to stay agreeable, to stay quiet. At the time, silence felt like peace. But silence, when it holds too much, can begin to feel like pressure. You may notice how your thoughts circle the same moments, small exchanges, half-spoken truths, things you almost said but didn't, not because you were afraid, but because you hoped understanding would come without explanation. You hoped things would resolve themselves naturally. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. There is a strange exhaustion that comes from holding back what the heart wants to release. It is not loud exhaustion. It is subtle. A tiredness that shows itself in sighs you didn't notice you were taking, in pauses that last a little longer than before, in a quiet sense that something inside is working too hard. And yet, you remain silent, not because you have nothing to say, but because saying it feels complicated. Words can change things. Words can invite questions, and sometimes you are not ready for either. So you sit with the discomfort, hoping it will soften on its own. The silence becomes a mirror. In it, you begin to see yourself more clearly, not just your thoughts, but your patterns, how quickly you take responsibility for feelings that are not yours, how often you try to protect the quiet, even when it costs you your ease, how easily you accept inner discomfort as something to endure. You may ask yourself if this is strength, or if it is simply habit. Is staying quiet a sign of wisdom, or is it a way of avoiding conflict? The answer does not come quickly. It arrives slowly through observation, through stillness, through the gentle honesty that only silence can bring. There is no judgment in this moment, only awareness. You begin to understand that unspoken feelings do not disappear. They settle, they wait. And when left unattended, they begin to shape the way you see the world, the way you respond, the way you withdraw. The discomfort is not asking to be solved. It is asking to be understood. It wants you to notice the difference between silence that heals and silence that hides, between restraint that brings peace and restraint that builds walls inside the heart. So you remain there, breathing slowly, listening carefully, letting the silence speak without interrupting it, allowing the discomfort to exist without pushing it away. In this quiet observation, something begins to shift, not outwardly, not visibly, but inwardly, where real change always begins. And in that inner space, you start to sense that silence, when chosen with awareness, can become something else entirely. Not a burden, not a weight, but a doorway waiting to be understood. There comes a time when silence is no longer just something you keep. It becomes something others notice. They sense it in the pauses you take, in the way you listen more than you speak, in how your eyes linger as if weighing unseen thoughts. And without meaning to, they begin to fill that silence with their own ideas. They may look at you and assume they understand. They may decide what your quiet means, that you agree, that you don't care, that you are distant or proud or unchanged, and you hear these assumptions without hearing the words. You feel them in the way conversations shift, in the way explanations are no longer offered, in the subtle distance that grows without announcement. Being misunderstood does not always arrive loudly. Often it comes softly, wrapped in politeness and calm expressions. Nothing is said directly. Nothing is challenged openly. Yet something feels wrong. You sense that the picture they hold of you is incomplete, perhaps even untrue, and still you remain quiet. You may wonder if you should speak, if a few words could correct the misunderstanding, if explaining yourself would ease the quiet tension. But explanation feels heavy. It asks for energy you are not sure you have. It asks you to step into a space where your inner world must be translated into language, knowing it may still not be received as you intend. There is a particular ache in knowing who you are, yet feeling unseen. Not unseen in presence, but unseen in essence. Your intentions misunderstood, your silence mistaken for indifference. your restraint mistaken for weakness, and you carry this quietly because correcting it feels like a risk you are not ready to take. Sometimes they speak around you, not to you. Their words float past, filled with conclusions that were never discussed. You listen not to argue, but to understand how easily meaning can drift when silence stands in its place. You realize how quickly stories are formed when answers are not given. And yet, part of you understands them. Silence invites interpretation. When nothing is said, people reach for meaning wherever they can find it. They fill the gaps with their own experiences, their own fears, their own expectations. You know this, and so you hesitate to blame them. Still, knowing does not erase the feeling. There is a quiet loneliness in being misread, in feeling that if you spoke, you might be heard but not understood, that your words might be listened to but not truly felt. And so you weigh the cost of speaking against the cost of staying silent. You ask yourself gentle questions in the stillness. Is it better to be understood by many, or to remain true to what feels right inside? Is clarity always worth the disturbance it brings, or is there strength in allowing others to see what they will, while you hold your truth quietly? The silence grows deeper here, not empty, but thoughtful. You begin to see that misunderstanding does not take away who you are. It does not change your inner values. It does not erase your awareness. It only reveals how little control you have over how others perceive you. This realization is both unsettling and strangely calming. Unsettling, because it reminds you that no amount of explanation can guarantee understanding. Calming, because it releases you from the burden of constantly trying to be seen correctly. You notice that when you stop resisting misunderstanding, its weight shifts. It still exists, but it no longer presses as hard against the heart. You begin to accept that being unseen by others does not mean you are lost. It simply means your journey is inward now. So you sit with this truth quietly, allowing the silence to remain even as it is misunderstood, observing without defending, listening without correcting. In this quiet endurance, something subtle forms within you. A deeper patience, a steadier sense of self, and the beginning of an understanding that being misunderstood is not always a failure of communication, but sometimes a test of inner steadiness. At some point, without any clear signal, something begins to shift, not outside, where things continue as they always have, but inside, where a small pause opens. It is not dramatic. It does not arrive with clarity or certainty. It feels more like a moment of stillness between breaths, where the noise inside briefly softens. You notice it when a familiar thought returns, but this time it does not pull you in as deeply. The feeling is still there, but it no longer controls the direction of your attention. You watch it instead, quietly, almost with curiosity, and you wonder when this distance appeared. In that pause, a realization begins to form, not as a conclusion, but as a gentle understanding. You see how often reaction has shaped your inner world, how quickly emotions have moved you toward explanation, defense, or withdrawal, how much energy was spent responding to what never truly required your response. This understanding does not come with regret. There is no harsh judgment of the past, only a calm recognition. You begin to see that reacting has always felt necessary, but rarely felt peaceful. That every reaction carried a cost, even when it felt justified. The pause grows slightly longer, long enough for you to ask yourself a quiet question. What happens if I do nothing? Not out of fear, not out of avoidance, but out of awareness. What happens if I allow the moment to pass without shaping it? You sit with this question. You do not rush to answer it. You allow it to settle. In the stillness, memories rise gently. Moments where silence brought clarity. Moments where restraint protected something fragile inside you. Moments where not reacting changed the outcome in ways you only understood much later. You begin to notice that power does not always move outward. Sometimes it remains still. Sometimes it chooses not to engage. And in that choice, there is a quiet strength that does not need to be proven. The realization deepens. You see that silence is not the absence of response, but the presence of control. It is the space where emotions are acknowledged without being acted upon, where thoughts are observed without being followed. This awareness changes the way you experience discomfort. When tension appears, you no longer rush to resolve it. You sit with it. You let it show you what it carries. You notice how quickly the urge to react rises and how quickly it falls when you do not feed it. There is a sense of relief in this, not because the world has changed, but because your relationship with it has. You begin to understand that you are not responsible for every misunderstanding. You are not required to answer every assumption. You are not obligated to fill every silence. The pause becomes a place of refuge, a small inner space where you can stand without being pulled, where you can choose presence over impulse, where you can listen without absorbing what does not belong to you. This realization does not make you distant, it makes you grounded. You remain aware of what happens around you, but you no longer allow it to define your inner state so easily. You begin to trust the quiet wisdom that emerges when you stop reacting, and in this trust something settles. The need to explain softens. The urge to defend loosens its grip. You begin to feel a subtle alignment, as though something inside has found its proper place. There is no announcement of this change, no moment where you declare it to yourself. It simply becomes part of you, a gentle shift in how you move through silence, through discomfort, through misunderstanding. You remain seated in the quiet, aware of the pause that now exists within you. A pause that offers clarity instead of confusion. A pause that holds strength without noise. And in that pause, you sense that a different way of being has quietly begun. There is a moment when silence is no longer something that happens to you. It becomes something you choose, not out of fear, and not because you have nothing to say, but because you have begun to see what reaction often takes away. The urge still appears. It always does. A feeling rises in the chest, quick and familiar, asking to be released through words or actions. You notice it the way one notices a wave forming in the distance. It has shape, it has force, and yet you do not move toward it. You stay where you are. At first, this feels unnatural. Silence asks for patience, and patience can feel uncomfortable. There is a sense that something must be done, something must be answered. But you wait. You allow the moment to pass through you without interruption. You listen to your breath. You observe the feeling as it rises, reaches its peak, and slowly begins to fade. In this waiting, you discover something quiet and unexpected. The feeling loses its urgency. What once felt overwhelming now feels manageable. You realize that reaction was never the only option. It was simply the most familiar one. Choosing silence does not mean you agree. It does not mean you accept what feels wrong. It means you trust yourself enough to not be pulled by every impulse. You begin to understand that dignity lives in this space, a calm dignity that does not need explanation. You notice how silence changes the way you see yourself. There is a steadiness that forms when you do not rush to respond, a sense of self-respect that grows when you allow emotions to exist without acting them out. You feel less scattered, more whole. They may continue as they always have. Words may still be spoken, assumptions may still be made, but something has shifted in you. Their actions no longer dictate your inner balance. You listen without absorbing. You observe without engaging. There is a quiet confidence in this, not the kind that announces itself, but the kind that settles deep within. You feel it when you choose not to explain something that does not need defending, when you allow silence to speak on your behalf, when you let time reveal what words could not. You begin to see that reaction often comes from a need to be seen, to be validated, to be understood immediately. Silence, when chosen with awareness, comes from a different place. It comes from knowing who you are, even when others do not. Choice is not always easy. There are moments when silence feels heavy, when words sit on the tongue waiting to be released. In those moments, you return to the stillness inside. You remind yourself that not every truth needs to be spoken right away. Some truths are better protected by quiet. As you continue to choose silence, you notice its effect on your inner world. The noise lessens. The constant replaying of conversations fades. You no longer feel the same pull to revisit what was said or unsaid. Your mind finds more space. Your heart feels less burdened. Silence becomes a boundary, a gentle one but firm. It keeps your energy from being scattered. It preserves what is essential. You begin to understand that reacting often gives away more than it resolves. Silence, on the other hand, keeps something intact. This does not make you distant or cold. It makes you intentional. When you do speak, your words carry more weight. When you do act, your actions come from clarity rather than impulse. You are no longer driven by the need to respond, but guided by the choice to remain centered. And so, you sit with this choice night after night, moment after moment, choosing silence not as an escape, but as a form of strength, a quiet strength that does not seek attention, a strength that rests calmly within, untouched by the noise around it. In this silence, you find something steady, something that does not rise or fall with every passing moment, something that feels like self-respect, quietly taking root. Growth rarely announces itself. It does not arrive with certainty or clear signs. It happens quietly, often when no one is watching, often when it feels like nothing is changing at all. You continue to move through your days much the same way. Yet something inside has begun to take on a different shape. You notice it in small moments. Nothing once stirred a strong reaction, but now only passes through you. When a familiar tension appears, but you meet it with calm rather than resistance. These moments are easy to overlook, yet they carry a quiet meaning. They show you that restraint has begun to do its work. Restraint is often misunderstood. It is not about holding yourself back out of fear. It is not about denying what you feel. It is about allowing feelings to exist without letting them rule you. This kind of restraint does not harden the heart. It steadies it. At times you may wonder if this quiet way of being is making any difference. There is no outward reward, no recognition, no clear proof that choosing silence and patience is leading anywhere at all. And yet, something within you feels more settled than before. You begin to trust this feeling. You notice how your inner world has grown less reactive, less crowded. Thoughts come and go more freely. Emotions rise and fall without leaving the same heavy mark. You no longer carry every moment with you. You let many of them pass. There is strength in this letting go, a strength that does not need to assert itself. You feel it when you resist the urge to revisit old conversations, when you choose not to explain yourself yet again, when you allow others to be as they are, without trying to shape their understanding. This restraint creates space. In that space, you begin to hear your own thoughts more clearly, not the loud ones driven by emotion, but the quiet ones shaped by insight. You begin to sense what truly matters to you, separate from what demands attention. You may notice that your reactions no longer feel urgent. You do not feel the same pressure to be seen, to be right, to be understood immediately. There is a patience that has taken root, a patience that waits not because it is passive, but because it is confident. This confidence does not push outward. It settles inward. You carry it in the way you listen, in the way you pause before responding, in the way you choose your moments carefully. You begin to understand that your energy is valuable, and not everything deserves it. They may not notice this change, or they may sense it without understanding it. Either way, their response matters less now. You are no longer measuring yourself against their reactions. You are measuring yourself against your own sense of calm. Restraint teaches you something important. It teaches you that peace is not found in controlling outcomes, but in controlling yourself. that dignity grows when you act from clarity rather than impulse, that strength can exist without noise. There are still moments of discomfort. Growth does not remove them, but it changes how you meet them. You no longer rush to escape discomfort. You sit with it, you allow it to teach you what it carries. And when it has nothing more to offer, you let it go. In this way, restraint becomes a teacher, a quiet one. It shows you how to remain steady when things are uncertain, how to stay present when understanding is incomplete, how to hold your ground without needing to defend it. You begin to feel a deeper respect for yourself. Not because you have mastered anything, but because you have learned to stay with yourself through difficulty. You have learned that silence, when chosen with care, can strengthen rather than weaken. As the night deepens, you remain there, aware of this subtle growth taking place. It does not demand attention. It does not ask to be proven. It simply continues, quietly shaping the way you move through the world from the inside out. And in that quiet shaping, you find a strength that feels steady, enduring, and deeply your own. There comes a time when you realize that watching can be more powerful than responding. Not watching with judgment and not with distance, but with calm attention. You remain present yet untouched, a quiet witness to what unfolds around you. They continue as they always have. Their words follow familiar patterns. Their actions move in ways you have seen before. Nothing about them has changed, and that is what makes the change within you so clear. You are no longer pulled into the same rhythm. You are no longer carried by the same current. You listen, but something is different now. You hear the words, yet you do not carry them as deeply. You notice how easily meaning can be shaped by emotion, how often people speak from habit rather than intention. And instead of reacting, you simply observe. This observation brings clarity. You begin to see what once felt personal as something more neutral. Patterns repeat themselves. Reactions follow expectations. You recognize that much of what happens is not about you at all, even when it appears to be directed toward you. There is relief in this understanding. A soft release of tension you did not realize you were holding. You no longer feel responsible for correcting every misunderstanding or guiding every moment toward resolution. You allow things to unfold without interference. Watching without responding creates space. In that space, your thoughts slow down. You no longer rush to prepare answers or defenses. You remain still, grounded in your own presence. You notice how silence now feels less like absence and more like stability. There may be moments when they look toward you, expecting a response, a word, a reaction. You feel the familiar urge rise, then gently settle. You remain quiet, not out of avoidance, but out of clarity. You understand that not responding is also a choice, and often a wise one. In this quiet watching, you begin to understand others more deeply, not through their explanations, but through their patterns. You see what repeats, what never changes, what words cannot hide. And this understanding does not make you bitter. It makes you calm. You stop taking things so personally, not because you care less, but because you see more. You recognize the difference between what is said and what is meant, between what is offered and what is projected. And you no longer feel the need to carry what was never yours. There is a quiet strength in this position. You are present yet not entangled, aware yet not reactive. You feel steady in a way that does not depend on agreement or approval. Your inner balance remains intact even as things move around you. This does not make you passive. It makes you deliberate. When you choose to speak, it is because it matters. When you choose to act, it is because it aligns with something true inside you. Silence is no longer a default, it is a conscious state. You may notice how your body responds differently now. Less tension in the chest, fewer restless thoughts, a deeper sense of ease in moments that once felt uncertain. Watching without responding has given you back something valuable. You begin to understand that peace does not come from changing others, but from releasing the need to be changed by them. That calm does not require explanation. That stillness can exist even in the presence of noise. As you sit there quietly observing, you feel a sense of distance that does not separate you but protects you. A gentle boundary that keeps your inner world undisturbed. You remain open but not exposed, present but not pulled. And in this quiet watching, something settles even deeper within you. A trust in your own awareness, a confidence in your restraint, a knowing that you do not need to respond to everything to remain whole. So you continue to observe, calmly and patiently, letting moments pass, letting words fade, letting silence do its quiet work. And in that silence you remain steady, grounded, and at peace with your choice to simply watch. Eventually you reach a place where the quiet no longer feels fragile, it feels settled, like still water that does not tremble at every passing sound. You notice this not because something dramatic has changed, but because nothing needs to. The world continues in its familiar ways. Words are spoken, silences appear, moments come and go without asking for permission, and yet, inside you, there is a steadiness that remains, a calm that does not depend on how things unfold. You sit with yourself and feel no urge to move away, no need to distract the mind or fill the space with thought. Silence rests easily now. It does not demand attention. It does not carry tension. It simply exists like a quiet companion. You realize that this stillness cannot be taken from you, not by misunderstanding, not by distance, not by the choices of others. It lives somewhere deeper than reaction, deeper than words. It belongs to you alone. There was a time when silence felt like absence, like something missing. Now it feels complete. It holds understanding without explanation. It carries strength without display. You no longer feel the need to protect it. It protects itself. You think back gently to the moments that once unsettled you. They feel distant now, and erased but softened. They no longer pull at your attention or ask to be revisited. They have done their work and quietly stepped aside. In this calm, you begin to sense a quiet gratitude, not for ease, but for clarity, for the understanding that came slowly through patience and restraint, for the realization that inner peace grows when you stop asking the world to give it to you. You no longer measure your strength by how much you endure or how much you explain. You feel it in your ability to remain still, in your willingness to let things be unresolved, in your comfort with not being fully understood. There is a gentle confidence in this, a confidence that does not compare or compete. It does not rise or fall with attention. It simply remains steady and grounded. You notice how your breath moves without effort, how your thoughts come and go without pulling you along, how silence now feels like a home rather than a place to pass through. You are not waiting for anything. You are not resisting anything. This does not mean life is without difficulty. It means difficulty no longer defines your inner state. You have learned to carry yourself with care, to respond when necessary, and to remain quiet when it is wiser. They may never fully understand this change, and that is fine. Understanding is no longer a requirement for your peace. You have learned that some truths are meant to be lived, not explained. As the night grows deeper, you remain there, unhurried. Thoughts slow, the mind rests. There is nothing to prove, nothing to resolve, only the quiet presence of being fully with yourself. You realize now that inner strength does not announce itself. It does not demand recognition. It shows itself in calm moments, in gentle restraint, in the ability to remain whole regardless of what unfolds around you. And so you sit in this stillness, feeling its depth, its simplicity, knowing that it will be there when noise returns, when questions arise, when uncertainty appears again. It will be there waiting quietly, just as it always has been. In this calm, resolved space, you find something enduring, Not excitement, not triumph, but a quiet certainty, a sense that whatever comes, you can meet it without losing yourself. The silence remains, and this time it feels like strength,